Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for yet another tariff episode of Freight Expectations. Joining us, as you can see, are two hopefully familiar faces, our President and CEO, Adam Hill, and our Director of U.S. Customs Brokerage, Caleb Hall. So, once again, we all kind of know why we're here. We're going to talk about the joys of tariffs and the ever-changing landscape, we'll say, to put it nicely. So we'll kind of go chronologically over the last month or so of some of the different actions that have been announced and started to go into effect. So Caleb, I know we were talking yesterday. Most of the newer ones kind of went into effect late July. So if you want to kind of give us an overview, and we can go back to, I believe it was July 22nd, we had those Section 301 tariffs against Brazilian imports that hit the ledger, we'll say. So if you want to give us a little background, kind of what we're dealing with there and what the impetus was there, and we can kind of move on down the timeline.
Absolutely. I'm going to take a slight step back from there, just for everybody, minor history lesson of the last, let's see, we're in August, so the last 8 months or so. So obviously we know that IEEPA was ruled illegal. That's what all of the CAPE claims and everything have been about for the last 4.5 months. Actually, exactly 4 months as of today. April 20th was when CAPE went live. So when IEEPA was struck down back in February, it was immediately replaced with Section 122. Section 122 was really it was a Band-Aid measure. Let's call it what it is. The administration knew that they had to get something in place quickly in order to not just not have tariffs coming in for those items over a period of time. So Section 122, rather than having country-specific rates, was a flat 10% across the board. Some threats about 15%, but that never went into effect, thankfully. Had a period of 150 days that it had to go through, right? The only way to extend it from there was congressional approval. We got to July 21st or so before they really started talking about what was going to happen next. And ultimately, what was announced was that Section 122 was allowed to sunset. And in its place, even though it was not portrayed that way, suddenly a Section 301 tariff was put in place that just so happened to happen the same day that the Section 122 tariffs went in place. But a couple days before that, there was also an additional Section 301 tariff measure specific to Brazil. So let's talk about that for just a minute. So Brazil's Section 301 measure, if you go back to 2018 with Section 301 with China, it was largely about intellectual property, unfair trading practices. There's a little bit of, just being upset with the government in general. The Brazil 301 is very similar. It is citing many of the same reasons, citing that their government has unfair trading practices, intellectual property issues, things along those lines. So as of July 22nd, anything importing into the U.S. that has a country of origin of Brazil is subject to an additional, I believe it's 25% duty. So that 25% stacks on top of the what's called ad valorem duty, or what we refer to generally as your base duty. So Section 301 Brazil started on July 22nd. A couple days later, that new tariff measure that was replacing Section 122 went into effect, which is Section 301 for forced labor. Anybody who has been importing for the last couple of years is aware that the government actually has had a renewed interest in stopping forced labor. This is not necessarily out of left field, right? So a couple of years back, we started talking about the Weber Forced Labor Protection Act. There's a specific region in China that is known for having higher rates of forced labor, slave labor, whatever you want to call it. And essentially the government has said anything that is made in that region, you can't import into the US. It's not a tariff. It's strictly you cannot import it into the US. We've had several clients run into issues with suppliers that weren't actually, they were importing from shippers that brought goods in from that region. They could not ship them. This is different. So this forced labor is different in a couple of ways. One is that it does not completely stop the goods from coming in. It simply applies an additional either 10% or 12.5% tariff on those goods. So again, we go to, this is in addition to the ad valorem or base duty rate for most of them, with the exception of, I believe, 3 sets of countries, those being Taiwan, Japan, and anything from the EU. If the UK might have it as well, I don't remember off the top of my head if the UK does. It's ringing a bell, but I also know they had an IEEPA deal that was similar. So,
while you're getting into this, do you want to touch on the difference between the 12.5% and the 10% countries and why there is that difference?
Honestly, I couldn't tell. I mean, some countries we are asserting have worse labor practices, I suppose you could say.
Yeah.
Adam, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, but I didn't see any specific, this is why these countries are 12.5 versus these are 10.
No, and I think to go maybe back a little bit, kind of rehash where you were, I think Section 301 came out during the first Trump administration, right? Like, this is not a new way to add tariffs with very little oversight. It is legal. Whether we like it or not, it's a different conversation. I think that's been a big piece of this, right? We heard that there's IEEPA. Oh, now we're getting our money back. Then it's, oh, there's 122, which is the stopgap, which we've talked about. And there's now the big question is, are we getting our money back from 122? My gut says no. There is a court case that's out there running because, once again, they believe the president exceeded his authority. If you really look into the framework of what 122 is designed for, it was not designed for what it was used for. So we were playing in the gray anyways there. I still think my gut says that the administration wins the 122 fight here. And then now we're back to the 301 fight. And I think the biggest issue, in my opinion, now with where we are with 301, with new 301 investigations, is you flash back to Trump 1.0, even during the Biden administration, the people in the opposition around and the investigation around 301 tariffs was mostly bipartisan. It was mostly, and now we've kind of shifted that over the last year or two to a significant portion of administration friendlies, meaning that these seem to be moving. If you remember the first 301 tranches, they blasted off over the course of, what was that, like maybe 9 months. It took them a year to even come into existence. There was a massive program around exclusions and how those exclusions worked and all of those things. And that was what I will believe, or at least give credit to, kind of the bipartisan nature of where that landed. And now I think we are, whether you like the tariffs or don't like the tariffs, is a different conversation. And I've sat in rooms on both sides of this conversation, but I think what you're going to see is a continual impetus towards more tariffs. And while this is just the next round, and it looks like we are, quote unquote, cutting deals where we're maxing tariffs out, and for some of these countries, I think we're going to continue down this road. And a lot of people have asked, well, what happens in 2 years? And that's the one we get all the time. And I don't really think anything's going to change, folks. I think the only real thing that might change is the level of chaos that the timelines have brought. I mean, you want to talk about even the most recent Canadian ones, right? They were supposed to go live, then we delayed them 72 hours. My guess is they may not go live anyways, so we'll see. But I think the chaos around tariffs, maybe not the tariffs themselves, does calm down in a couple of years, simply because hopefully the next administration just doesn't have the whipsaw effect that this one does, right or wrong. But so why are 10 and 12 and a half? I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we just, it's kind of like on a golf course, you throw some grass in the air. Like, I think the wind's blowing this way. And that's really what it kind of feels like in a handful of these. And we don't have logic. I mean, when we rolled out the Liberation Day tariffs, the logic, and I'll put it in quotes, right, was, oh, it was our trade deficit. Well, there were countries on there that we actually run a trade surplus with. So that obviously wasn't our trade deficit, but that's about where we are right now with kind of how these have been run out. And do I love them? No. Is it where we are today? Yes. Are there workarounds? Are there legal, I should say, legal workarounds? Are there opportunities to look for reductions? Yes. And I think it's reframing where we are today. And it's just, as Julie so finally put it, it's a what did you say, terrific in the middle of a dumpster fire. So it's about where we are.
I hope everybody saw my cringe there at that pun.
You hit it so well.
And Adam, you spoke to a little bit about the future. So one of the questions that we have gotten, because we went through a period there for a little while where Section 122 was a temporary measure, right? It was from the start stated this can only last for 5 months by law. The only option to renew it was a congressional vote. I think you hit the nail on the head when we talked about it on our last webinar that no congressman who wants to keep their seat was going to run on keeping tariffs in place. And that's exactly what we saw. So those expired, but I think for some people, it has put the idea into their heads that some of these tariffs may actually be temporary. And one of the first questions I got when 301 forced labor went into place was, when do these expire? They do not. The short answer is there is no sunset date on these. I don't believe there's a sunset clause in general on these. So whereas Section 301 China, I believe, had a 5-year review, 6-year review, something along those lines. I do not recall seeing any language such as that in these tariffs. If there is, I haven't found it, but these are, as far as the administration is currently standing, viewed as permanent. So
I would agree.
Correct.
Yep.
Whether we like it or don't like it, I would agree that at this point, assume you are paying these for the foreseeable future. Your business can plan on this expense.
Correct. And while we're on 301, we actually did just get a really good question in the Q&A. And I can almost guarantee there are multiple people out there wondering the same thing. Can you talk a little bit about the most favored nation rate, Caleb, and how that applies to a lot of the verbiage that we see where it's, the lesser of the most favored nation or the 12.5%. So can you kind of touch on how that factors into
the most favored nation, as in every country outside of about 6 at this point? Yeah.
They really, for lack of a better word, trump that up. You had one, I get one. So most favored nation, it just means your normal duty rate, basically. As Adam referenced, there's about 6 countries that are not considered most favored nations. Currently, they're mostly ones that we are either in active war with, or we are, embargoing. So there is Cuba, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Belarus, I believe, is on that list.
There's just a few. So the most favored nation rate is just, if you look at the tariff, like any of you have actually gone in and looked at the tariff, you see columns in the tariff. It's just column 1, which, as Caleb said, it is your base tariff rate. It's just, you see 3%. That's what you used to pay. That is the most favored nation rate.
So
that's a great question.
Yeah. So essentially what you're saying is that tariff rate can't go then over
In
what
some instances, like Caleb mentioned, like the
correct.
EU or some of the
Yeah.
other ones, basically they're saying, well, if you're already paying 3% and the
Mhm.
new 301 is an additional 10, in theory, that number 3 plus 10 is 13. But they're saying, nope, we're going to cap it at 10 or a certain level. So you're never going to pay more than the 10%, as in the example Caleb used.
Yep.
which
Yep.
has caused, I mean, at this point, CBP has figured out how to properly do that programming, which is great. When they did similar deals with IEEPA, first with the EU, it was a bit of a disaster because essentially you are calculating that duty rate against two different rates live. And customs really had some headaches with that. I think any brokers that were dealing with that had about 2 weeks of headaches with that until they finally figured out. But thankfully, the programming was in place pretty quick on these.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. Thank you guys for touching on that. Let's see. So then, I guess again, if we're moving down the timeline, 1 week after we had all of that fun with the 301 and the forced labor, then we had some Section 232 tariffs introduced on pharmaceutical products. Do we need to touch on the distinction between 232 versus 301 and where the legal justification comes in, or should we just move on? I know we have probably
I feel
some
like it's a little bit of
repeat
administration
attendees, or is that
whack-a-mole.
too deep into it? Yeah.
I just think it's a little bit of administration whack-a-mole, right? They find where they think that the section applies and then they roll with it. I mean, we're getting a brand new one with Section 338, right, coming out with potentially on the Canadian stuff. So this is very much a team of attorneys in a dark room saying, we think this fits better here than here. 232 is national security. I mean, that is the impetus behind 232. And so if they can throw it in that bucket, I think that's also, if you just think about saying those words out loud, right? Oh, this is our national security interest. Like, how do you say it? I mean, we've all seen all the horrible political commercials where you voted against the national security. Like, I can just hear all the political fodder and fallout around this idea, right? Whether or not you believe in them or not. So I think anything they can throw down the 232 path is the easiest path due to the phrasing around national security. And that's really where 232 lands.
Yeah. That's
301
fair.
is just more of around like an unjust, unfair trade idea.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.
But to talk about
well, yeah.
232 pharmaceuticals specifically, this is one that actually had a bit of a runway. You know, Adam talked about how 301 originally back in 2018 had several months of lead up. This is the first of the new tariff measures that actually had something I would say was a logical amount of time to really examine and implement. The pharmaceuticals was talked about months ago. It's not something that came out of left field. So this one actually followed something much more akin to what a normal rollout of a tariff is. The long short of it being that pharmaceuticals, you know, from outside entities pose a risk to national security, whether you look at it from a, you know, they're poisoning American standpoint, or simply, you know, having offshore companies provide, you know, pharmaceuticals to our citizens is a dangerous thing in general. That's where they fell under that, is it's a national security problem. The rate is, I believe, generally 100% additional duty. I think there's some difference there. There were several items. Actually, this one was one of the most complex. So the tariff rate is extremely high compared to the others. Most of the other tariff measures we're seeing are 10, 15, 20%, something along those lines. This is a straight up 100%. And I think it actually goes up at the end of 27, something along those lines. But there are also several exclusions in terms of the intended use for the pharmaceutical, whether it is a generic or a name brand pharmaceutical. And it even goes so far as to say, if your company has, we will say the word plans, they have some actual requirements for what the plans have to be. But if your company has plans to onshore the manufacturing of these goods, you may be able to get either a reduction or an overall delay of these additional 232 tariffs. So this one had a lot of meat to it for such a small percentage of the imports into the US. So a lot of time was actually spent on this one. And that one went into effect, I believe, on July 31st.
Yep. And like you said, they have a pretty long runway for some of those plans to onshore and kind of adjust those things. So, yes, that was
absolutely,
again, but like you said, that's not as large of an issue as maybe some of the aluminum and copper ones that we've seen, or just some of the more blanket tariffs. So
not as broad reaching. However, I mean, with Kansas City, especially being the animal health corridor, obviously, you know, we do have clients that were affected by these. Pharmaceuticals is big in the Kansas City area. We've got Bayer here. We've got several other companies here that would be affected by this. So while it may not have been as broad reaching as the 232 metals or the automotive, in Kansas City specifically, it's a pretty big concern for sure.
Absolutely. Then I guess, yeah, we can kind of circle back unless you guys have any further thoughts on the pharmaceutical ones there. Adam kind of touched on it earlier, and it is probably the forefront of everybody's mind right now are those 338 tariffs that may or may not go into effect against Canada, bright and early Saturday morning Central Time. Do you guys just kind of want to give your thoughts on, are we going to see those again? We had the announcement about a month ago. We were told on Tuesday night, right before they were due to go into effect, that now we're pushing them back 3 days so we can negotiate with Canada a little bit further. Again, if you guys just want to kind of give your thoughts as people who are kind of in that every single day, what do you think we're going to see there? And again, I know that those ones are big because there are really no exceptions.
I was going to say, I think that the first call out is, this is very similar to the original IEEPA rollout where USMCA does not matter, which I'm not even sure is legal, honestly, like in that entire thing. I'm not a legal expert here, but just my gut says maybe there's something to that idea. Might be why there's a potential delay. They're better off. I mean, you have to start to think about, historically, we looked at tariffs and we looked at trade as something that was stable, that was normal, that was regular. And in the last year, it's become political fodder for both sides. And I think when you start to hear and listen to pundits on TV, on the administration, Truth Social, was it X? What you for anything out there? This is all about the court of public opinion, not the actual what's going on. And so it is going to be better for them to roll out a potential win if 338 goes away than it is for someone to have said, you can't do this, that's flat out illegal, and we're going to lose in court, because there's going to be a challenge. So there's been the challenge of pretty much there was a challenge that just wound up closing, I want to say a month or so ago, from the original Section 301 during the first Trump administration. So, there will be challenges to any of the tariff measures that are out there. This one specifically, I think, is ripe for challenge. Do I think it goes in? My gut says yes, because it's going to be hard. How do you walk it all the way back? Do I think it survives very long? No. I think maybe I could very much see it being similar to that initial IEEPA rollout where we had 72 hours of nonsense. And then they're like, nope, USMCA does apply. Because while you agree or disagree with 338, we do have trade agreements in place. And I think just the general idea that we have ignored those is tough. I mean, if you honestly think about the long-term impact of what we've done, is we seem to be a tougher place to negotiate with today, because it seems like we may just change our mind during the next administration, which is not historically how we've been, especially when it comes to free trade agreements. But I think the win of a 338 on a Saturday is there's less traffic. There just is, right? The Canadian border is actually open 24/7. Most people don't realize that. Like, our southern border technically closes. Customs goes home. Customs does not go home on the northern border. So the U.S. Canadian border operates a 24/7 clip. And so Saturday just means things slow down a little bit. Same with Sunday. So my gut says it goes in. My over-under is the end of next week. I think by the end of next week, this is maybe long gone. And then everyone's like, well, can I get my money back? I have no idea. I have absolutely
The government
no
is
idea.
historically very giving when it comes to returning money to us, right?
Right. Yeah, they're really good.
I mean,
collectors.
over the last 4 months or so, they have been.
Actually, there was just I was listening the other day to something, and they said the IEEPA refunds actually added $1 billion to the deficit last month, because of the amount of refunds exiting the building right now, which is a good thing for everyone on this call. There's money coming back into your pocket.
Yep. Can we take a step back
earlier?
real quick?
They're pushing 130 billion total refunds now, just from IEEPA.
Yep.
So hopefully some of you have seen that hit your company's accounts again. But
just
yeah,
to take
Caleb,
a
do you
step
have any
back real
thoughts on
quick.
338? Sorry. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you're fine. So just so that we can make sure that, I mean, I know everybody on this call probably lives and breathes tariffs almost as much as we do as brokers, but just to make sure everybody's on the same page about what we're actually talking about with 338, because we did it with everything else. Section 338 is the tariff measure that was specifically levied against Canada, a flat 50% duty against, let's see, it was dairy products, alcohol, and one other commodity that I don't remember. Automobiles. So compared to 232 and 301, a much smaller set of HTS codes was hit on this. If you look at it in the CFR, it's only a block of text that's about this long instead of a block of text that is several pages long, like all of the others, which is nice because it means that it hits fewer companies. But with the USMCA, it's the only one that USMCA, well, that's not entirely true. It in Section 232 metals are the only two that USMCA does not exempt from the additional tariffs. Everything else has had that USMCA clause. Even some 232, such as the automotive, did have a USMCA clause that says if it's USMCA, it complies. Obviously, with it being automotive, that's a huge thing for USMCA. North America is very big on automotive. But if we want to take a second just to talk about USMCA, because it's been in the news over the past few months with the, it's time to renew, it's time to
renewal.
Yep. So many of you are aware that Trump has said that we are not renewing USMCA, in his words. I do want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. That doesn't mean USMCA magically disappears. It does not mean that it falls apart. There is a clause in USMCA that requires a country have a full 6-month notice to withdraw from USMCA, and we have not actually withdrawn from USMCA. We have simply decided not to extend it, and I believe Adam is currently in its current version.
And so it's going to run all the way out if nothing changes.
36?
It was 36. If nothing changes, it runs through 36, as is today, with no change. The only thing that technically changes is what was already built in, which is some of the automotive rules of origin, where you have regional value content creeping up year over year over year. Other than that, you're not going to see anything change. The whole non-renewal was that there was a built-in clause in 2026 to say, if we do we want to renew as is? And then it pushed it out even further than 36. So basically, this is just saying that we're good until 36. So for anyone on this call, that means we're good for at least the next couple of years until the next administration wants to really take a hard look at this. Do I think we withdraw? No, I don't. And I think so. I think USMCA, as we know it, may be different at the end of the day, but it will still exist in roughly the same shape and size. And I think where we're going to see a lot of negotiation is on the tiny subsets that make up. And while I say tiny, it's just they're more niche industries, the lumber industry, the dairy, while they are large in their own right from just a generalized importation, they are very small subsets of the tariff. They are very small subsets of really where this is. The automobile section was negotiated extremely heavily during the last round. That's where you saw minimum labor per hour rates. That's where you saw the increase in regional value content. So you saw a ton of that work done in automotive the last time around. And so there may be more of that coming in the next go round here. But I think at the end of the day, USMCA as we know it will roughly stay the same. And we still have a massive runway. I mean, 36, wow. I mean, that's still a decade away, folks.
I think a lot of us are still processing 2016 anyway, so.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And again, I mean, there have already, correct me if I'm wrong, there have already been some preliminary discussions and meetings between the US and Mexico to at least touch base and start. But like you said, we have quite a bit of runway, and say what you will about media in general. What's the hot headline? US decides to not renew USMCA. So of course that's
the first one,
the big one, and then you read into it and you say, oh, well, now that we have your attention, nothing's changing anytime soon. So bear with me here. We got a bit of a longer question here regarding auto credits. They said we have some cases where we import products to our US warehouse from overseas. These products are then subsequently picked up by our tiers OEM customer and exported to Mexico, Canada to support vehicle assembly at those countries. Our OEM customer has informed us that based on the response they received from DOC, we can utilize the offset credits that they have provided to us in such instances. Can you guys provide any insight into that?
Short answer is potentially, because the DOC. So let's talk about just in general 232 offset credits for Section 232 automotive. That's what we're referring to here. So basically, a few months after the 232 automotive tariffs went into place, there were ways in which an OEM, a Ford, Stellantis, Kia, whatever, could go to the U.S. Department of Commerce and say, basically, these goods are for manufacture of parts in the U.S. And as such, we want to claim refunds on the tariffs for 232 auto because ultimately they were assembled into U.S. manufactured goods. That is the only part of this question that I think probably requires a little more discussion, but I'm going to address overall the idea of these offsets. If your company or the OEM that you work with is granted one of these DOC exclusions or the 232 offset licenses, you are given a license number that you can then add to a customs entry, and it will exempt you from the Section 232 automotive duty. Where this question gets a little hazy is it specifically says they're exported to Mexico and Canada to support vehicle assembly there. My understanding of these offset licenses is that they are usually only applicable if you are actually assembling in the US. But that is something that I would have to dig into a little more. So, Jose, if you wanted to shoot that question over to us with a little more detail about that process, happy to dig into it a little more. But generally speaking, you can get a DOC exclusion and reclaim that money after you have imported it into the US. We do have several clients that they have the initial import, and then the OEM will send them the list of parts that they need to apply a license to. The caveat here is that that DOC license comes with requirements for record keeping. You have to be able to prove that you are meeting the requirements in that DOC letter, and that is between yourself and that license holder, something you have to make sure is ironclad. Because if you do not have the support to say that what you claimed that license on went into something that met those requirements, you are likely looking at a tariff bill, potential penalties, and you just have to be extremely careful with it.
I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent, same topic, but one of the things we're hearing from some of our tier 1 suppliers and tier 2 suppliers is that they are being asked by some of the large OEMs to provide full access to their ACE accounts. My gut says I wouldn't do that. And it is something that we were at a client, they're a tier 1. They don't import. I mean, the majority of their business is automotive. They have some other stuff, but they obviously sell to potentially multiple tier 1s. There is, and while every attorney is telling the tier 1 or the actual OEMs will just get access to their ACE data, the ACE data doesn't actually provide the part level detail that Caleb mentioned that we actually need. But what it does provide is your cost basis against every tariff number that exists. So you start to think through that. You are importing seats. There's only a handful of tariff numbers that fall into seats. And now we're turning around and saying, well, line 1 on this entry, this was the value. And there is some reverse math that, we can start to back into, and the OEM can start to back into truly into maybe what your cost basis is and things like that. That ACE data is your data. That is the record. And when I say the record, that ACE data, God forbid, well, I say that, I used to be, nothing went in front of the Court of International Trade. Now everything goes in front of the Court of International Trade. But in any event, usually I would say, God forbid, something goes in front of the Court of International Trade. When they ask for your entry records, historically they asked it for boxes of paper, right? That 7501, that entry summary document. Now it's basically a link to the ACE report. That is the record. That is the legal record of your entry. It's the same thing that customs keeps. It's the same thing you keep as an importer. Why would you give someone access to the legal record? It just doesn't make sense to me, the information they're asking for, because my gut says you're going to give them access and you're still going to get the same questions because the ACE data doesn't actually give them what they need. But you just provided extra information. If you've already done it, I'd highly recommend you turn it off. We have had multitude of conversations with folks and we said, don't do it. And they say, well, they're pushing. I said, they don't need it. They're asking you for this other information. And I said, well, what are they asking you for? And I said, well, they want to know part number, this, and this. And I said, the first thing ACE doesn't give you is part number. And we have heard complaints forever that if I could only match my part number up to my ACE data, right? That's why we as a broker do all of your entries at a part number level. Just that's common practice for us, but that's not industry common practice. It's getting more so here now than it was. But at the end of the day, I would not give access out to my ACE data to people outside of my entity. Can your broker have access? Well, they filed the information. So, I mean, it's really kind of giving access to the same information I have in my system. But other than that, I wouldn't give it to outside entities, especially not clients, right? I just don't think it's the best decision for you as an organization. You still your company, you make your decision. It drives me nuts when someone tells me how to run mine. So I'm not telling you how to run yours. It's your call at the end of the day, but that would be my 2 cents on that piece of this puzzle. And I think it's a big one, but I think it's also just a general public service announcement around ACE and giving of that access to other people.
There is a question about whether we think that 338 will continue to get kicked down the road. The short answer is yes.
Yeah, like I said, I do think it maybe goes in on Saturday, because it's a tough one not to say we did it now that it's made all this news. But
well, like you said, Saturday may be a little easier day for them to throw it in there on us for now. And then
maybe it's gone on Monday.
Yes, see what the court of public opinion says through the rest of the weekend, and then lo and behold, everyone gets back to the office on Monday, and
fingers crossed.
We may see what happens, right? So I'm sure.
But I can assure you, if they go away, we're going to announce a deal. We made a deal.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing. I mean, with 338, with 301, 301, it's interesting to see it touted as this is about forced labor, but there are special deals. That's a little silly, I think, but I do think that similar to IEEPA, we will start to see on the 301 forced labor, certain countries start to have similar setups with the Taiwan, the EU, the Japan, and suddenly you'll start to see countries that have, this country has made a deal. They have agreed to really look at their forced labor practices, and as such, they are going to start getting a different tariff deal. We did the same thing with IEEPA while it was in effect. I would not be surprised to see the same thing here. And that's what we're going to continue to see. The downside to 301, I mean, there's a lot of downsides to 301, but obviously from a brokerage and a standpoint of an importer and keeping track of what you have to know, Section 122 was relatively simple. It was a flat rate for all countries, unless you had one of the special exclusions that meant you paid zero. There wasn't all of this, if it's from this country, you pay this. That was IEEPA, and it all went away. We have essentially re-implemented the same setup that we had under IEEPA, where everything has its own countries. And I think that was very intentional, specific, so that if and when these deals start to roll out, they don't have to roll out additional provisional HTS codes. They just adjust the percentage behavior of those provisional HTS codes. That would be my expectation.
Well, and I saw it phrased one way when he initially announced them. I can't remember where I saw it, but somebody called the 338 the US's retaliation to Canada's retaliation to the initial IEEPA tariffs, which unfortunately was a very fitting way in my mind to phrase that. But to your point, it's just another bargaining chip potentially to then, like you said, come to a deal down the road and get what we want out of Canada one way or another. So,
well, I mean, we've thrown a lot of numbers around, section this, section that, 122, 338, 301, 232. And I think the other thing that we need to talk about here is, what does that really mean for all of you on the call, right? And there is this thing called stacking. And I think that is probably the piece that has caused the most confusion just in my shop, along with in just the trade community in general, that there's a lot of confusion around, if I have this one, do I also have this one? Well, if I have that one, that means I do or don't have that one. I think that's a big piece of this puzzle as well. Caleb, you are much more eloquent than I am on this piece of the puzzle, but when you're done, I will want to come back and say one thing around, because I do think there might be a little loophole here about duty drawback that we can talk about.
Yep. So generally speaking, the exclusions and the stacking for Section 301 forced labor are almost identical to the ones that were in place for IEEPA and Section 122. So that means that if you pay, that is a very specific thing that people need to be aware of. If you pay Section 232, you get exempted from Section 301 forced labor. If you pay Section 232, it's automotive, lumber, pharmaceutical, metals, any Section 232 duty that you pay, you are exempted from the Section 301 tariffs. There are specific commodity exemptions as well, but the big thing that has caused confusion is the term subject to. So something can be subject to Section 232 because it's a certain HTS code. So let's take 232 auto, for example. Something can be subject to 232 automotive, but if that product is not actually an automotive part, you claim an exemption from the 232 automotive. You're
But
not
then you pay.
but then you pay the 301 because you didn't pay the 232. CBP has released tariff stacking flowcharts, and I think without fail, each of them has been wrong in some way. And from an operational standpoint on our side, our whole job is getting the tariffs right, putting them in the right order, making sure that we're claiming the exclusions. But we are humans. Sometimes errors are made. You know who's not rejecting them when they're wrong?
Customs.
The people who are charging you the money.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, and the reason I say I think there might be a loophole here is that 232 duties are not subject to drawback, which in and of itself is asinine. The whole idea is that we produce more here in the United States. So if we import them and then we turn around and export them, I'm not exactly sure why we can't get our duties back. No one asked me. But because of how all of this 301 works and how like the order of tariffs, technically, correct me if I'm wrong here, Caleb, 301 goes first.
301 goes first every time.
So if 301 goes first, the question is that I have no one I've heard address yet, is technically that means that line is subject to 301. And so does that mean that 232 tariff became a 301 tariff? And if that case, can we get our money back if we export items? Someone will, if the loophole does exist, someone will close it. But I'm just really curious if there's honestly a loophole sitting out there that no one's picked up on yet. Some attorney somewhere is going to make this argument. I guarantee someone will go try to make this argument. Will they win or not? We'll see. But I am honestly curious if maybe there is a little bit of a loophole here, at least for the short term, because we have a lot of customers who export significant volumes of items that are subject to 232. And so that drawback provision goes away for them quickly, and getting up to 99% of that money back. And I'm curious here if there might just be a loophole.
Very possibly. And on
that's
that
custom nerd talk, but
yeah, I mean that's where we live. So, and on the subject of 301 and stacking, I do want to call out two specific caveats to that. Section 301 China does not interact with any of the tariff measures that have been
a good point.
enacted
Good
over the last year and a half, including 301 forced labor. So if you are importing something from China and it is subject to the 301 forced labor from China, you are also still going to pay that 301 China duty from 2018, the 7.5%, the 25, the 50. I think there's a couple that are at 100. Those do stack, unfortunately. The same does go for the 301 for Brazil. So again, that's why I drew that parallel to the China and the Brazil, because they work very similarly. Their reasonings are very similar. That one is, unfortunately, we just had a client the other day asking about this. They do stack. You pay the 25% out of Brazil, plus I think they're on the 12.5%. So that's the way that they've set this up. So if that changes at any point, we will obviously let everybody know. But thus far, we haven't seen a lot of changes in how exclusions are applied once they actually roll out the tariff measure.
Well, if you think about the logic there, whether we agree or not, 301 has never excluded us from something else. 232 has excluded us from 301, but never the inverse of that. So while, like I said, agree or disagree, logically, at least from that's why those two 301 stack. They're just different measures using the same reference to Section 301.
I do want to spend just a couple minutes. I know we're running out of time here, but there is some updates on the CAPE side of things, because I don't know that we're allowed to have a tariff webinar without talking about CAPE a little bit. So one, we are still seeing refunds come back. That has not stopped. It has slowed a little bit. I think CBP has really reached the point where all of the quote unquote easy ones are done, unless they haven't been applied for. And for the love of God, if you have not applied for your CAPE refunds, please do so. They are starting to hit the ones that have the steel and aluminum percentages, where they're going to start asking for backup. We've seen some of that start now. So be prepared to start seeing some CF28s asking for more information on why XYZ is being claimed. So keep an eye out for that. They are thankfully starting to reach out to importers of record who have rejected ACHs out there. So just a reminder, you need to, as an importer, log into your ACE portal and get that ACH information added with a US bank account. It has to be a US bank account number. So foreign importers of record, this is a bit of a struggle for, we understand. But once you have that ACH number in there, they're not automatically going to re-trigger that. You do have to request that they re-trigger any refunds that are out there. They actually just updated that email address last week to a different one from the one that they had initially announced. And we've actually had several clients say that they were getting overnight replies from that new email address. Maybe because not everybody knows it exists yet, so they have fewer emails coming in. Who knows?
The other thing. Oh, go ahead, Caleb. Sorry.
I was just going to say the big news is that CAPE Phase 3 has been delayed. So Phase 3, mostly including those entries that are past 80 days final liquidation. That's what's included in Phase 3. CBP is having some calculation issues, surprisingly. So Phase 3 has been delayed. We don't have a specific date for when it's been pushed out to yet, but that is something that has been delayed. I know a lot of people have been waiting because they really want to do that rather than filing a court case with the CIT, but we'll see how that rolls out.
I think the other thing to mention is double check your refunds. CBP is making a significant amount of mistakes. We have seen, we have an automotive customer that got way too much back. I mean, I know no one would be overly bummed about that, but it's still wrong. But we've seen a ton of supplemental duty bills go out that are just flat out wrong. We've seen it a lot in those of you who use some special use provisions in Chapter 98, where you were using those to exclude you from some other duties that may have been hitting. We'll talk 9817, agricultural actual use. There's a handful of other ones. And we're seeing during customs programming, they missed a lot of these 9817 edge cases that are causing massive supplemental duty bills to go out, you to get contacted from your surety providers, your bond providers, your brokers, customs saying, hey, this is wrong. You owe us. I mean, we had one customer get, I think, about 6 million in invoices that were all wrong. They've subsequently all been canceled. It's just extra work. And so if you get a bill from customs right now, double check. I'm not saying you shouldn't always double check it, but right now is really the time, because I know if you get a small invoice from CBP, we have a lot of clients who are like, you know what? It's not worth the fight. We're just going to pay it whether we agree or not. It's the government. They sent me a bill for $1,000. I'm just going to pay it because I don't want to. While I understand the concept very well, I also want to just call out the fact that there are a significant number of errors being made right now to the tune of large dollar amounts. Now, we can get those invoices canceled, but there's a process to work through to get that done and proven. So just as a general announcement, there are significant errors in refunds. I know there have been a few fear mongers out there around filing CAPE claims and attorneys saying you shouldn't even file, or even the administration dropping some notes around, well, we'll see what happens later. So there's been fear mongering on that side as well. And I think what we're honestly seeing is that there's a process. They stood it up unbelievably quickly, especially in government work, and they have turned around and made errors. And so now it's about just getting it right and getting them fixed. So if you get one of those, please reach out. We're happy to help, and go from there. Because we are seeing that, and we're seeing bills get canceled, which is not always the easiest thing for CBP to do, but they seem to be partnering is maybe the best word to use right now in this sense, which I haven't been able to say for a long time, but truly partnering on some of these issues where they're just plain flat out mistakes.
Yep. And I will say just one bit of self-promotion for us regarding the ACE portal, your ACH, all of that. If you are struggling with that, Scarborough's YouTube channel has a great 25, 30-minute step-by-step walkthrough done by Allison Shore. And she shows you how to find all of the pertinent reports, how to make sure you're enrolled for ACH. So if you are having any issues with the ACE portal, please head to our YouTube channel. Watch that from Allison. If you're still struggling, please feel free to reach out. But like Adam said, very important to be checking all of your information through your ACE portal and making sure you're staying up to date on all of that. So unless you guys have anything else, we are 1 minute over, and I don't see any final questions. So I will say thank you both for joining us and giving us such a good rundown of the last month or two of tariff actions and kind of looking forward to what we might see. So thank you both for joining us, and thank you everybody else for being here and giving us the time on this Thursday afternoon. So with that, we will give you your afternoon back.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Caleb.